Hey guys, welcome to Wings and Bibles. This is a new YouTube channel that I'm starting with my fiance. The plan for this YouTube channel is to combine aviation and the Bible. My part of this channel is the aviation side of things, such as reading through the FAR-AIM and just generally anything related to aviation. My fiance's part will be reading through the Bible with an ASMR twist. We really wanted to do something together that we're both passionate about, so we just decided to start this channel. First, we'll start off with a little about me and my experience, and then we'll kick the tires and light the fires and jump straight into the FAR-AIM. My name is Dustin, and I am a certified flight instructor and have been flying for about 4 years now. Over this time, I have flown a variety of general aviation planes from the Aranca Chief and the Globe Swift to almost every kind of Cessna you can think of. Over my aviation career, I have picked up a lot of knowledge and skill that have made me the pilot I am today. With that out of the way, let's jump right in. So, when you're reading through the FAR, I want you to come to this website, the Electronic Code of Federal Regulations. Now, this website has all the rules pertaining to the United States, such as federal financial assistance, the president, agriculture, but the one we're worried about is Title 14, which is Aeronautics and Space. This pertains to everything aviation and space. What we're going to be in today is Chapter 1, Subchapter D, which pertains to airmen, and we're going to come to Part 61, which is certification of pilots, flight instructors, and ground instructors. And we'll come down to Subpart A, and today we'll be in 61.3, which is requirements for certificates, ratings, and authorizations. Now, while we're here, I want to point out some features of this website and why I like it. So up here, it's saying this website is up to date. It was up to date as of 123, and today is 127. So we know this is up to date. First thing here is the table of contents. You also have details. This is generally used for if you're writing an essay and need to reference a particular regulation. You can print it out as well. You have display options. You can subscribe to a particular regulation if you want to be up to date and know if there's any changes to this regulation. It also has a timeline. This explains when and if this document has been changed in the past. You can search a current date to look at what this regulation looked like on a certain date, and then you can also compare dates to see what changed. Now, some techniques when reading through the FAR is when you're reading through it, and this is why I like the one on the internet instead of just from a book, is if you ever come across a blue highlighted part, whatever it's referencing, you can click on that and it will take you directly to whatever it's referencing. In this case, it's referencing 61.19, duration of pilot and instructor certificates and privileges. So always, when you're reading through your FARs, if you come across a part, click on it and read through it. Yes, it's going to make your studying a bit longer, but it will provide the necessary context for that part. So starting off here, we have 61.3, the requirement for certificates, ratings, and authorizations. So Part A says, required pilot certificate for operating a civil aircraft of the United States. No person may serve as a required pilot flight crew member of a civil aircraft of the United States unless that person has in the person's physical possession or readily accessible in the aircraft when exercising the privileges of that pilot certificate or authorization. So it's saying you can't operate an aircraft if you don't have in your physical possession one of these things. So the first thing is a pilot certificate issued under this part and in accordance with 6119. So you have to have a pilot certificate, and 6119 is duration of pilot and instructor certificates and privileges. So basically, you have to have your pilot certificate and it has to be valid. It can't be expired. A special purpose pilot authorization issued under 6177, which is operation of a civil aircraft of the United States and leased by a U.S. citizen. So a aircraft registered in the United States being leased or rented to a non-U.S. citizen. A temporary certificate issued under 6117, which is a temporary certificate. So this is issued whenever you get a new certificate, ground instructor certificate, and that temporary pilot certificate is issued and expires on the expiration date shown on the certificate upon receipt of the permanent certificate whenever you receive it in the mail, and upon receipt of a notice that the certificate or rating sought is denied or revoked. So if you have a temporary certificate, you have to have that. A document conveying temporary authority to exercise certificate privileges issued by an airman certification branch under 6129E. 6129E says a person who has lost an airman certificate, medical certificate, or knowledge test report may obtain in a form or manner approved by the administrator a document conveying temporary authority to exercise certificate privileges from the FAA Aeromedical Certification Branch or the Airman Certification Branch as appropriate. So if for some reason you lose your medical or your certificate, you have to have that temporary, some type of document conveying temporary authority to exercise your privileges. When engaged in a flight operation within the United States for a Part 119 certificate holder authorized to conduct operations under Part 121. 121 operations are domestic flag and supplemental operations. Oops, I got lost here. There we go. We're back. All right. 135 is commuter and on-demand operations and rules governing persons on board such aircraft. A temporary document provided by that certificate holder under an approved certificate verification plan. When engaged in a flight operation within the United States for a fractional ownership program manager authorized to conduct operations under Part 91, Subpart K of this chapter, a temporary document provided by that program manager under an approved certificate verification plan, or when operating an aircraft with a foreign country, a pilot license issued by that country may be used. Okay, so just to recap, you cannot serve as a required pilot flight crew member unless you have in your physical possession one of these things. Moving on to number 2, you also have to have a photo identification that is in the person's physical possession or readily accessible in the aircraft when exercising the privileges of that pilot certificate or authorization. The photo identification must be either a driver's license issued by a state, the District of Columbia, or a territory or possession of the United States. So let's take Texas, for example. I have a Texas driver's license. I can use that as my photo identification. Now, if you lived in Guam or Puerto Rico and you have identification from that territory, you can use that. If you're a government official or work for the government, if you have that government identification, card, that will also suffice for this part. If you're in the military, your U.S. Armed Forces identification card will also suffice. If you have a passport, you can use that as well. You can also use any credential that authorizes unescorted access to security identification display area or the SIDA at an airport regulated under 49 CFR 1542. So this is airport security. So if you work at an airport and you're issued a SIDA card, which basically allows you access onto the ramp where the airplanes are. If you're a ramp agent, any type of maintenance crew that has access to the outside part, to the runway, you can use your SIDA identification card as identification. And you can also use any other form of identification that the administrator finds acceptable. So this next part is required pilot certificate for operating a foreign registered aircraft within the United States. So you have an aircraft that's from another country and it's operating within the United States. No person may serve as a required pilot flight crew member of a civil aircraft of foreign registry within the United States unless they have their pilot certificate or a document issued under 6129E, which, if you remember, is a temporary certificate if you lost your pilot certificate, is in that person's physical possession or readily accessible in the aircraft when exercising the privileges of that pilot certificate, and has been issued in accordance with this part or has been issued or validated by the country in which the aircraft is registered. Moving on to medical certificates. A person may serve as a required pilot flight crew member of an aircraft only if that person holds the appropriate medical certificate issued under Part 67 of this chapter. So Part 67 is medical standards and certification. It also goes into what operations and what type of medical certificate you need, or other documentation acceptable to the FAA that is in the person's physical possession or readily accessible in the aircraft. So that's a big theme in this part. It either has to be in the airplane or on your person. Paragraph C2 of this section provides certain exceptions to the requirement to hold a medical certificate. So this section right here is saying you have to have a medical certificate. This section right here is saying these are the times you don't need a medical certificate. A person is not required to meet the requirements of paragraph C1, which is up here, of this section if that person is exercising the privileges of a student pilot certificate while seeking a pilot certificate with a glider category rating, a balloon class rating, or glider or balloon privileges, is exercising the privileges of a student pilot certificate while seeking a sport pilot certificate with other than glider or balloon privileges and holds a U.S. driver's license, is exercising the privileges of a student pilot certificate while seeking a pilot certificate with a weight shift control aircraft category rating or a powered parachute category rating and holds a U.S. driver's license, is exercising the privileges of a sport pilot certificate with glider or balloon privileges, is exercising the privileges of a sport pilot certificate with other than glider or balloon privileges and holds a U.S. driver's license. A person who has applied for or held a medical certificate may exercise the privileges of a sport pilot certificate using a U.S. driver's license only if that person has been found eligible for the issuance of at least a third-class airman medical certificate at the time of his or her most recent application, and has not had his or her most recently issued medical certificate suspended or revoked, or most recent authorization for a special issuance of a medical certificate withdrawn. You also don't need a medical certificate if you're holding a pilot certificate with a balloon class rating and that person is exercising the privileges of a private pilot certificate in a balloon or is providing flight training in a balloon in accordance with 61-133. 61-133 is for flight instruction in a balloon. So if you hold a pilot certificate in a balloon class rating, or you're providing flight training, you don't need a medical certificate. If you're holding a pilot certificate or a flight instructor certificate with a glider category rating and is piloting or providing training in a glider as appropriate. If you're exercising the privileges of a flight instructor certificate, provided the person is not acting as pilot in command or as a required pilot flight crew member, is exercising the privileges of a ground instructor certificate, is operating an aircraft with a foreign country using a pilot license issued by that country and possesses evidence of current medical qualification for that license. That's just saying if you're from a foreign country and are using the pilot license from that foreign country, you don't need a U.S. medical certificate. You just need a medical certificate or some type of documentation showing that you meet the medical qualification for that license in that country. If operating an aircraft with a U.S. pilot certificate issued on the basis of a foreign pilot license issued on 6175, 6175 is private pilot certificate issued on the basis of a foreign pilot license and holds a medical certificate issued by the foreign country that issued the foreign pilot's license, which is in that person's physical possession or readily accessible in the aircraft when exercising the privileges of that airman's certificate. Is a pilot of the U.S. Armed Forces, has an up-to-date U.S. military medical examination, and holds a military pilot flight status. So if you're in the Army and you're a pilot, or the military and you're a pilot, and you have an up-to-date medical examination, you don't need a medical certificate. If you're exercising the privileges of a student, recreational, or private pilot certificate for operations conducted under the conditions and limitations set forth in 61.113I, let's go look at that. A private pilot may act as pilot in command or serve as a required flight crew member of an aircraft without holding a medical certificate issued under Part 67 of this chapter, provided the pilot holds a valid U.S. driver's license, meets the requirements of 6123, and complies with this section and all the following conditions and limitations. So 6123, a person using a driver's license to meet the requirements of paragraph C while operating under the conditions and limitations of 61.113I must meet the following requirements. So we'll just skip through there because we're going to get down a rabbit hole if we keep clicking on those blue links. And is exercising the privileges of a student pilot certificate or higher while acting as a pilot in command on a special medical flight test authorized under Part 67. So this next section is about flight instructors. A person who holds a flight instructor certificate issued under this part must have that certificate or other documentation acceptable to the administrator, such as a temporary certificate, in that person's physical possession or readily accessible in the aircraft when exercising the privileges of that flight instructor certificate. Except as provided in paragraph D3 of the section, no person other than the holder of a flight instructor certificate issued under this part with the appropriate rating on that certificate may do any one of these things. So you have to have your flight instructor certificate with you if you're going to do one of these things. And those things are: give training required to qualify a person for solo flight and solo cross-country flight, endorse an applicant for a pilot certificate or rating issued under this part, flight instructor certificate or a rating issued under this part, or ground instructor certificate or rating issued under this part. It also allows you to endorse a pilot logbook to show training given, or endorse a logbook for solo operating privileges. A flight instructor certificate issued under this part is not necessary under paragraph D2 of this section if the training is given by the holder of a commercial pilot certificate with a lighter than air rating. So if you're a commercial pilot, if you're a commercial pilot with lighter than air rating, you can give instruction without a flight instructor certificate, provided the training is given in accordance with the privileges of the certificate in a lighter than air aircraft. Under paragraph D2 of this section, if the training is given by the holder of an airline transport pilot with a rating appropriate to the aircraft in which the training is given, provided the training is given in accordance with the privileges of the certificate and conducted in accordance with an approved air carrier training program approved under Part 121 and Part 135 of this chapter. Under paragraph D2 of this section, if the training is given by a person who is qualified in accordance with subpart C of Part 142 of this chapter, provided the training is conducted in accordance with an approved Part 142 training program. Under paragraphs D2I, D2IIC, and D2III of this section, if the training is given by the holder of a ground instructor certificate in accordance with the privileges of the certificate, or under paragraph D2III of this section, if the training is given by an authorized flight instructor under 6141. Next is the instrument rating. I probably won't go too in depth on this. I will probably cover this in a later video, but we'll read through it anyways. No person may act as a pilot in command of a civil aircraft under IFR or instrument flight rules, or in weather conditions less than the minimums prescribed for VFR flight, unless that person holds one of these things: the appropriate aircraft category, class, and type, if a class or type rating is required, and instrument rating on that person's pilot certificate for any airplane, helicopter, or powered lift being flown. An airline transport pilot certificate with the appropriate aircraft category, class, and type rating, if a class or type rating is required for the aircraft being flown. For a glider, a pilot certificate with a glider category rating and an airplane instrument rating, or for an airship, a commercial pilot certificate with a lighter than air category rating and airship class rating. Category 2 pilot authorization. Except for a pilot conducting Category 2 operations under Part 121 or Part 135, a person may not act as pilot in command of a civil aircraft during Category 2 operations unless that person holds a Category 2 pilot authorization for that category or class of aircraft and the type of aircraft if applicable. In the case of civil aircraft, a foreign registry is authorized by the country of registry to act as pilot in command of the aircraft in Category 2 operations. Act as second in command of a civil aircraft during Category 2 operations unless that person holds a pilot certificate with category and class ratings, if a class rating is required for that aircraft, and an instrument rating for that category aircraft. Holds an airline transport pilot certificate with category and class ratings if a class rating is required for that aircraft, or in the case of a civil aircraft, a foreign registry is authorized by the country of registry to act as second in command of that aircraft during Category 2 operations. Category 3 pilot authorization. Except for a pilot conducting Category 3 operations under Part 121 or Part 135, a person may not act as pilot in command of a civil aircraft during Category 3 operations unless that person holds a Category 3 pilot authorization for that category or class of aircraft and the type of aircraft if applicable, or in the case of a civil aircraft, a foreign registry is authorized by the country of registry to act as pilot in command of that aircraft in Category 3 operations. As second in command of a civil aircraft during Category 3 operations unless that person holds a pilot certificate with category and class ratings, if a class rating is required for that aircraft, and instrument rating for that category aircraft. Holds an airline transport pilot certificate with a category and class rating if a class rating is required for that aircraft, or in the case of a civil aircraft of foreign registry is authorized by the country of registry to act as second in command of that aircraft during Category 3 operations. Category A aircraft pilot authorization. The administrator may issue a certificate of authorization for a Category 2 or Category 3 operation to the pilot of a smaller aircraft that is a Category A aircraft as identified in 97.3b1 of this chapter. We'll look at that real quick. And Category A is defined as a speed less than 91 knots. The administrator determines that the Category 2 or Category 3 operation can be performed safely by that pilot under the terms of the Certificate of Authorization, and the Category 2 or Category 3 operation does not involve the carriage of persons or property for compensation or hire. And like I said, I know I just read over this real quickly, but I'll go over this and go more in depth in a later video, primarily on instrument flight. Next, we have the times we need to have our ground instructor certificate if you have one. Like I said in the beginning of this video, I have my AGI and IGI. So my ground instructor certificate allows me to do these things. Each person who holds a ground instructor certificate issued under this part must have that certificate or a temporary document issued under 6129E in that person's physical possession or immediately accessible when exercising the privileges of that certificate. Except as provided in paragraph I3 of this section, no person other than the holder of a ground instructor certificate issued under this part or part 143 with the appropriate rating on that certificate may give ground training required to qualify a person for solo flight and solo cross-country flights, endorse an applicant for a knowledge test required for a pilot, flight instructor, or ground instructor certificate or rating issued under this part, or endorse a pilot logbook to show ground training given. A ground instructor certificate issued under this part is not necessary, so this is when you don't need your ground instructor certificate. Under paragraph I2 of this section, if the training is given by the holder of a flight instructor certificate issued under this part in accordance with the privileges of that certificate. Under paragraph I2 of this section, if the training is given by the holder of a commercial pilot certificate with a lighter than air rating, provided the training is given in accordance with the privileges of the certificate in a lighter than air aircraft. Under paragraph I2 of this section, if the training is given by the holder of an airline transport pilot certificate with a rating appropriate to the aircraft in which the training is given, provided the training is given in accordance with the privileges of the certificate and conducted in accordance with an approved air carrier training program approved under Part 121 or Part 135 of this chapter. Under paragraph I2 of this section, if the training is given by a person who is qualified in accordance with subpart C of Part 142 of this chapter, provided the training is conducted in accordance with an approved Part 142 training program, or under paragraph I2 III of the section, if the training is given by an authorized flight instructor under 6141. So I always tell my students, once they get their private pilot's license, go ahead and study and take the test for your basic ground instructor. I always tell them this because when you're teaching is when you're really learning. If you can teach something, you really understand it. And I always throw the incentive of a little bit of compensation for your time instructing. With your ground instructor certificate, there's nothing in the FAR that says you can't get paid for that time that you spend instructing. So you also get to make a little bit of money off it. Another thing about that is the private pilot RIN test is pretty similar to the basic ground instructor test, with a few other things in addition to that. But it's always a good idea just to go after that. Next, we have age limitation for certain operations. No person who holds a pilot certificate issued under this part may serve as a pilot on a civil airplane of U.S. registry in the following operations if the person has reached his or her 60th birthday, or in the case of operation with more than one pilot, his or her 65th birthday. Scheduled international air services carrying passengers in turbojet powered airplanes. Scheduled international air services carrying passengers in airplanes having a passenger seat configuration of more than 9 passenger seats, excluding each crew member, non-scheduled international air transportation for compensation or hire in airplanes having a passenger seat configuration of more than 30 passenger seats, excluding each crew member seat, or scheduled international air services or non-scheduled international air transportation for compensation or hire in airplanes having a payload capacity of more than 7,500. This next section is just a few definitions that describe this part. So international air service, as used in paragraph, is that I or J? I can't really tell. That's J. Means scheduled air service performed in airplanes for the public transport of passengers, mail, or cargo, in which the service passes through the airspace over the territory of more than one country. International air transport, as used in paragraph J, means air transportation performed in airplanes for the public transport of passengers, mail, or cargo, in which the service passes through the airspace over the territory of more than one country. And here's some more definitions. Special purpose pilot authorization. Any person that is required to hold a special purpose pilot authorization issued in accordance with 6177 of this part must have that authorization and the person's foreign pilot license in that person's physical possession or have it readily accessible in the aircraft when exercising the privileges of that authorization. Now this one's a big one here. Inspection of certificate. Each person who holds an airman certificate temporary document in accordance with paragraph A1V or VI of this section, medical certificate documents establishing alternative medical qualification under Part 68 of this chapter, authorization or license required by this part must present it and their photo identification as described in paragraph A2 of this section for inspection upon request from the administrator, an authorized representative of the National Transportation Safety Board or NTSB, any federal, state, or local law enforcement officer, or an authorized representative of the Transportation Security Administration or TSA. So if you're asked to present any one of these documents that we just went over in this video by one of these people, you have to present it. And that pretty much sums up part 61.3. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. See ya.